Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolute biological and acoustic marvel that pretty much defined an entire era of music. We're going to look at the exact mechanics of a sound that no living human can produce today. So get ready, because we are investigating the incredibly wild and highly customized vocal anatomy of the castrato.
It's a pretty wild question, right? How exactly did a surgical procedure from the 1600s create an acoustic marvel that even today's acoustic science and advanced vocal training still cannot replicate? Well, we're going to unpack the exact physiological mechanics behind this superhuman sound, step by step, so we can finally understand exactly how these singers produced their legendary high notes.
Section 1. The Baroque Special Effect. Okay, to really understand this unique instrument, we first got to look at the extreme cultural landscape of Baroque opera that actually demanded it in the first place.
The Baroque stage was, well, it was absolute chaos. We're talking about a multi-sensory and incredibly loud spectacle. Audiences were watching sorcerers being hoisted into the sky on these massive, heavy wooden flying rigs. You had thunder effects simulated by stagehands literally rolling heavy cannonballs down wooden troughs right off stage. There was lightning created with ignited gunpowder and blinding smoke and fog from burning resins. It was basically a 17th century occupational hazard. Just imagine the sheer deafening volume of noise taking place on those stages.
Now, right in the middle of all those rolling cannonballs and explosive special effects, there was this major musical shift happening. It was called monody or homophony. So instead of a whole choir of voices blending together, composers shifted to a musical texture where a single, expressive, and highly memorable melody totally dominated over a supporting background. This basically meant one single vocal line had to carry the entire emotional weight of the scene.
So put those two things together, right? You've got deafening stage machinery on one hand, and you have this new musical style on the other that relies on just one soloist to cut through it all. Composers were desperate. They needed a literal vocal powerhouse capable of carrying that melody over the explosive stage effects and the orchestra. And this immense pressure, it created the demand for something that just didn't naturally exist, an impossible, custom-built acoustic instrument.
Section 2. Halting the vocal cords. Let's step away from the stage for a second and look inside the castrato's laryngeal time capsule, to see the actual anatomy. Creating this sound required a really severe and permanent biological intervention. First, scouts would go out and identify a young boy, usually around 7 to 9 years old, who had just exceptional vocal aptitude, like a really beautiful, agile treble voice. Then, a surgical castration was performed. Scientifically speaking, this permanently halted the adolescent surge of testosterone. Without that hormonal surge, laryngeal development was essentially frozen in place. It paused biological time and preserved that prepubescent vocal mechanism for life.
Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast in vocal fold growth. Think about a typical intact male. Puberty hits, and there's this massive 67% increase in the vocal cords, extending them to up to 29 millimeters in length. That's what lowers the fundamental frequency and deepens the voice. But in a castrato, because that testosterone was missing, the vocal folds only increased by about 25%. They totally froze at approximately 13 millimeters in length. Those dimensions are actually way closer to a female's vocal cords.
And because these vocal cords stayed thin, short, and relatively underdeveloped, they functioned, honestly, a lot like the incredibly light, agile chassis of a sports car. This minimal vocal fold mass meant there was just very little physical weight to move, allowing for unbelievably rapid vibration rates. That rapid vibration is exactly what produced those sustained high frequencies and that piercing, crystal-clear tone that could slice right through the noise of a Baroque theater.
Section 3. Lungs of a grown man. Okay, a sports car chassis isn't much without an engine, right? So let's look at the massive power source fueling those agile vocal cords.
While the castration froze the larynx in this juvenile state, it did the exact opposite to the rest of their body. The lack of testosterone caused delayed bone ossification, which basically means their growth plates didn't fuse when they normally would. As a result, their limbs, their rib cage, the whole thoracic cavity, and their lungs expanded to superhuman adult proportions. They often grew remarkably tall with massive pulmonary capacity. Imagine attaching a roaring heavy-duty truck engine to that lightweight sports car chassis we were just talking about.
1 minute. Just take a second to hold your breath right now. And imagine actually singing a single note for that long. Thanks to those giant enlarged rib cages and massive lungs, a castrato could draw in enough air to hold a single soaring high note at full volume for an entire minute. It's a staggering statistic when you think about the sheer breath control and diaphragmatic power required.
And the numbers actually get even crazier. 3.5. That is the number of octaves their vocal range frequently covered. Because they were combining adult lung pressure with those tiny, highly responsive vocal cords, they could push air with immense force to access a massive 3.5 octave range. We're talking spanning all the way from a low C3 up to a piercing D6.
Section 4. Why others couldn't compete. So you might be wondering, why couldn't anyone else just train to do this? Let's do a direct mechanical comparison to see why alternative singers physically couldn't replicate the castrato sound.
And this brilliantly illustrates the physical realities of the human voice. Take a female soprano, for instance. She has the low vocal cord mass for those high notes, but her lung capacity is simply smaller, which limits her projection over a full orchestra. A boy soprano has the exact right vocal cords, sure, but tiny lungs and basically no stamina. Then look at the falsettist, an adult male singing in his head voice. He has the lung capacity, but his vocal cords are thick and heavy, meaning he has to use incomplete glottal closure just to sing high, and that results in a breathier, weaker sound. Only the castrato had this completely impossible combination: massive adult lung capacity, low vocal cord mass, and complete, powerful glottal closure. It was the whole package.
This physical superiority literally changed what music could be. Charles Burney, who was an 18th century music historian, famously described their voices as sweet, flexible, and extensive. Because they had so much breath to spare and such incredibly light vocal cords, they possessed unparalleled agility. They could execute impossibly fast trills, massive leaps, and complex colorata ornamentations that would leave audiences absolutely breathless.
Section 5. The last castrato recording. All right, we've looked at the history and the biology. Now let's look at the hard acoustic evidence left behind by the very last generation of these singers.
It really raises the question, with all the advanced vocal training we have today, could modern countertenors ever truly replicate this historic sound mechanically? Well, we don't have to just guess based on old historical anecdotes, because we actually have 20th century spectral analysis to give us the hard answer. Let's move on and see how this era finally came to a close. Back in 1861, Italy officially criminalized castration for musical purposes. The practice faded fast, but a few aging singers stuck around in the Vatican's Sistine Chapel choir. And get this, in 1902 and 1904, one of them, Alessandro, actually stepped in front of an early gramophone horn and recorded his voice. By 1913, he retired, silencing this centuries-old tradition forever. But the scratchy audio discs? They survived.
And modern scientists have actually run spectral analysis on those Maresci recordings. The data is absolutely incredible. It proves, for sure, that acoustic science completely validates all that historical hype. The analysis reveals a true modal chest register extending way up into soprano altitudes. It displays dense format clustering right between 2.5 and 3.5 kHz, which in acoustics is known as the singer's formant, the exact frequency that cuts right through an orchestra. And above all, it proves complete laryngeal reinforcement. It wasn't falsetto, it was this deeply resonant, chest-anchored sound that a modern countertenor just simply cannot mechanically reproduce.
So, the crucial point here is this. The castrato was a literal biological paradox. It was an anatomical anomaly that created the ultimate vocal instrument, perfectly fusing female-like vocal agility with pure masculine volume, power, and stamina.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. As we look back at the sheer physics of this incredible vocal engine, we really have to wonder, what acoustic miracles have we permanently lost by closing the door on the most customized, mathematically perfect musical instrument in history? It's definitely a wild piece of science and history to wrap your head around. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the amazing science of sound.